The wind carried the smell of cut hay that morning, the kind of smell that takes you back to when life seemed simpler. Out here in Pine Hollow, mornings were supposed to be quiet, just the soft moan of cattle fences, the rustle of cottonwoods, and the low hum of tractors starting up in the distance. That was the kind of peace I had worked for all my life. But peace has a way of attracting those who can't stand to see it in someone else's hand. Her name was Karen Whitfield, though most folks around here never said it without a curl of the lip. She had the kind of presence that made you look twice, not because she was remarkable, but because she was loud, polished, and always dressed as if a magazine editor might stop by to take her picture on the spot. When she and her husband moved into Pine Hollow Ranch Estates 5 years back, folks thought it was a blessing. She said she wanted to bring standards to the town. What that meant was telling everyone else how to live. You see, my ranch had been in my family for 3 generations. The fences were old, the barn roof sagged in a few places, and the gravel driveway had weeds poking up. But the soil was good, the pastures green, and every inch of it felt like home. Karen didn't see it that way. The trouble started small. First, a letter tucked into my mailbox. Grass too long, it said, stamped with the HOA seal she had proudly designed herself. A week later, another letter. Old tractor must be stored out of sight. Then came the fine. It didn't matter that my ranch had been here long before the subdivision. It didn't matter that I never signed up for any HOA. Karen made it her mission to rope me in, to drag me under her little kingdom of rules. I ignored her letters at first. But the day she showed up with 2 sheriff's deputies and a clipboard thicker than a Bible, I knew this was no longer just neighborly bickering. "Mr. Callahan," she said, lips tight, voice clipped, "you are in violation of Section 4, subsection C, regarding livestock management and property upkeep. You are hereby ordered to remove non-compliant structures within 30 days. I looked her dead in the eye, then at the deputy. One of them, Deputy Miles, shifted uncomfortably, as if he knew this whole circus was wrong but didn't have the guts to say so. "This land ain't under your HOA, I said, voice calm but heavy as a storm rolling in. "My family deed predates Pine Hollow Ranch Estates by 50 years. Karen just smiled, the kind of smile that says she already had her victory written down in ink. "We'll see what the county clerk says about that." And with that, she handed me the citation like she was gifting me a present. That night I sat at my kitchen table with the old deed spread out before me. The paper was yellowed, corners torn, but the ink still stood proud. Callahan Ranch, established 1952, registered with the state. My father's name was on it, his father's before him. The weight of their lives pressed on my shoulders as I traced those letters with my fingertip. It wasn't just about fines or tractors or peeling paint on the barn. It was about someone trying to erase a man's history, someone who thought money and rules gave them the right to crush what others had built. And maybe, just maybe, she picked the wrong man to push. The next morning the real blow came. I was out by the barn repairing a gate when a county truck pulled up. A man in a suit stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Callahan, I'm here to inform you that your property is under review for zoning violations. If found non-compliant, you could face heavy penalties, including potential seizure of land." Seizure? That word cut deeper than a knife. My grip on the pliers tightened until my knuckles went white. Behind him, across the road, I spotted Karen standing on her porch, coffee mug in hand. A smile as wide as the Kansas plains stretched across her face. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't about rules. This was personal. She wanted me gone. She wanted my land, my history, my peace. And I swore right then she wasn't going to win. But I didn't yet know the storm that was coming, or how deep her claws reached into this town. The day ended with a knock on my door. Not a friendly knock, no rhythm, no patience, heavy, demanding. When I opened it, 2 deputies stood there again. "Mr. Callahan," one said, "you're under investigation for trespassing on HOA property." I blinked. Trespassing on my own land. They shifted, uneasy, but the paper in their hands said it plain. Karen had filed a complaint, said I was interfering with community property, said my cattle had crossed a line that wasn't there. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but all I felt was heat rising in my chest. What would you do, I thought, staring at those deputies, if someone tried to strip you of your land, your name, your freedom, just because they could? That night, as the crickets sang outside and the moon lit up the pasture, I made a choice. If Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get one. And this time, I wasn't playing by her rule. The weeks that followed felt like living in a stranger's skin. Pine Hollow, the place I'd known all my life, started to feel like enemy territory. Folks I'd shared coffee with at the diner, men I'd hauled hay for in summers past, they began avoiding my eyes. Conversations would stop when I walked in, and when they did talk, the words felt sharper than a barbed wire fence. It was clear as the sky over the prairie. Karen's poison had spread. One morning at the feed store, I walked in to buy salt licks and oats. Old Joe Henderson, a man who once borrowed my trailer every spring, shook his head at me from behind the counter. "Earl," he said, his voice quieter than, "I got orders not to sell you feed till you clear things up with the HOA. They're saying you're in violation of county livestock standards. Don't want no trouble on my hand." I just stood there, hands on the counter, staring at the old knot in the wood I'd seen 100 times before. Trouble on his hand. No, the trouble was on mine, and it was growing by the day. Walking back to my truck, I caught sight of Karen's SUV pulling into the parking lot. She climbed out, sunglasses perched on her head, clipboard hugged to her chest. She gave me a little wave, all smug and polished like she'd already won. It boiled my blood, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Not then. Back home, I found another letter nailed to my fence post. "Final warning," it read in bold print. "Remove non-compliant structures or face legal seizure." That word again, seizure. I sat on the porch that night, rocking in the chair my father built with his own hands, and thought about what it meant. A lifetime of work, sweat, and history, all stripped away because one woman with too much time and too much money decided she wanted control. What would you have done if your own neighbors turned their backs on you? If even the sheriff, an old friend of your father's, refused to return your calls? Because that's what happened next. I went down to the sheriff's office, deed in hand, ready to fight this nonsense head-on. Sheriff Wallace sat behind his desk, guts spilling over his belt, eyes tired but cold. "Earl," he said without even looking up at me, "these HOA folks have paperwork. They've got county zoning backing. My hands are tied." "Your hands are tied," I shot back, my voice cracking the stale air in that room. "You knew my father, Wallace. You knew this land was ours before any damn HOA even existed." Finally, he looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't just indifference, it was fear. "They've got connections higher than me," he muttered. "Let it go, Earl. Sell the place, move on. Sell the place, move on." As if a man can sell the sweat of his father, the grave of his mother, the soil that held his family's history. I walked out of that office with the deed still clutched in my hand, a fire burning in my chest. But fire alone can't stop a storm. A week later, I woke to the sound of engines outside. I stepped onto the porch and froze. Trucks, bulldozer, men in hard hats lining up along the edge of my pasture, and standing at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, sunglasses reflecting the morning sun, was Karen. She raised her hand, pointed toward my barn, and the machines roared to life. I ran toward them, shouting, waving the deed like a flag of war. "This is private property. You set one tire on this soil and you'll regret it." The foreman hesitated, engine still growling beneath him. He looked back at Karen. She smiled and gave him a little nod. That was when I realized they weren't here to talk. They were here to take. I stood in front of the barn, my boots kicking up dust, chest heat. "You'll have to run me over first," I told him. The machine slowed. The foreman cursed, climbing down from his seat. "Look, mister, I don't want no trouble, but I got orders and they came from the county. You either step aside or I call the sheriff." Before I could answer, Karen's voice cut through the air. "Callahan, you're finished. The town's tired of your eyesore. It's time you faced reality." Her words hit harder than the engine's growl. Finished. Reality. She wanted me gone, buried, erased. The workers stood waiting, the machines idling, the whole world holding its breath. And I knew I couldn't win this fight with just shouting. Not today. So I stepped back, for now. But as I walked away from that barn, the sound of engines still in my ears, I made a silent promise. This wasn't surrender, this was patience. Later that night, I sat alone in the barn, lantern light flickering on the old beams above me. Dust motes swirled like ghosts in the air. I opened the drawer of my father's old desk, searching for something I hadn't touched in years. Papers, letters, land survey. And then, I found it. A leather-bound folder, edges worn, seal cracked with age. Inside, the kind of documents most folks never knew existed: old agreements, federal designation, signatures of men long dead. And there, buried in the pile, was the truth I had almost forgotten. This land wasn't just ours. It was protected, exempt, shielded from the very kind of overreach Karen was trying to pull. I held the papers in my hands, heart pounding. If what I thought was true, then Karen had just overplayed her hand. But before I could read deeper, a sound split the night, glass shattering from the front of the house. I froze. Someone was here. The sound of shattering glass jolted me like a gunshot. I snuffed the lantern and pressed my back against the barn wall, ears straining against the silence that followed. Crickets still chirped in the pasture. A dog barked somewhere down the road. But inside my own house, I could hear footsteps crunching over broken glass. My blood ran hot. I grabbed the old Winchester I kept propped in the corner and moved across the yard, boots soft in the dirt. Through the window, moonlight poured across the living room floor, glinting off shards of glass. A shadow moved, then another. They weren't deputies. They weren't neighbors checking in. These were men sent to scare me. I kicked the door open, barrel leveled. "You've got 5 seconds to turn around and leave, or you're fertilizer for my pasture." The two men froze. Rough types, faces half hidden under caps, gloves on their hands. One muttered a curse. The other lifted his hand slow, backing toward the broken window. "We don't want trouble," the taller one said. "Then you picked the wrong damn house," I shot back, the rifle steady in my grip. They slipped out the way they came, tires spinning in the gravel as their truck tore off into the night. For a long while, I just stood there in the wreck of my living room, the only sound my own breath. Whoever they were, they hadn't come to steal. They'd come to warn me, to rattle me, maybe even to make me leave before the real fight began. But if anything, it only hardened my resolve. The next morning, I spread the old papers across the table. My father's neat handwriting in the margins, government stamps, notarized signatures, proof that Callahan Ranch wasn't under county zoning. Not then, not now, not ever. The land had been designated under a federal agricultural exemption back in the 1950s, renewed in the 70s, and it still stood. Karen's empire of rules had no jurisdiction here. None. But I couldn't just walk into court with dusty papers and expect to win. She had the sheriff, the county, the HOA board, all lined up against me. I needed someone who still believed in right over convenience. That's when I thought of Clara McMillan. Clara wasn't just a lawyer, she was a fighter. I'd gone to school with her back when we were kids chasing fireflies down at Willow Creek. She'd left Pine Hollow for the city, made a name for herself in property law, and come back when her daddy passed. Folks whispered she was too sharp, too stubborn for this little town. That's exactly why I needed her. I found her at her office downtown, a one-story brick building, peeling paint but a brass plate polished clean. She looked up from behind a desk stacked with books, glasses perched on her nose. "Earl Callahan," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Haven't seen you in 20 years. What kind of trouble have you managed to stir up?" I dropped the folder on her desk. Not trouble of my own making, trouble with Karen Whitfield. Her eyebrow arched at the name. She flipped through the paper, lips pressing tight as she read. 10 minutes passed in silence, just the scratch of her pen making notes. Finally, she looked up. "Earl, this is ironclad. Your land's untouchable. If this went to court, you win." But she hesitated, tapping the papers. "They'll never let it get that far. Karen's playing dirty. She's got half the county in her pocket. If she can't take your land legally, she'll do it by pressure, by smear, by force." I nodded. "Already tried last night, sent 2 men to my house." Clara leaned back, sighing. "Then you need more than a lawyer. You need light, sunlight, the kind that burns people like her." She picked up her phone, dialing a number I couldn't see. "I've got a contact in the State Housing Bureau. If Karen's been overstepping, if she's been falsifying claims or threatening seizure on exempt property, that's fraud. That's federal." Federal? The word tasted sweet on my tongue. Over the next few days, Clara and I dug deeper. Every document, every letter Karen had sent, fines stacked where no authority existed, zoning violations that never applied, and tucked in one file from the county clerk, an unsigned transfer form with my property's parcel number already filled in. Karen wasn't just trying to enforce rule, she was planning to take ownership of Callahan Ranch. I remember sitting there in Clara's office, staring at that form, My fists clenched so tight the paper nearly tore. "This isn't about keeping lawns trimmed," I muttered. "She wants the land, my land." Clara's voice was steady, calm. "Then we make sure she chokes on her own scheme." But Karen wasn't about to sit idle. The next morning, flyers appeared all over town, taped to doors, stapled to poles, handed out at the diner. My name in bold letters. Earl Callahan, threat to Pine Hollow. Unsafe, lawless, dangerous. By noon, folks wouldn't meet my eyes. Parents pulled their kids closer when I walked by. Even old friends turned their backs. That night, as I sat in the dark barn, Clara called. "They're moving faster than I thought," she said, voice low. "But Earl, I found something bigger than both of us." "What is it?" "The HOA charter Karen's using." She paused, taking a breath. "It's not just a homeowner's document. It's tied to a national oversight board, a board you might find familiar." I frowned. "Go on." "Earl, your name is listed, right here. You're not just exempt from her rules. On paper, you're one of the federal overseers of every HOA in the state." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Me, a rancher with dirt under his nails and boots worn thin, sitting at the top of the very structure Karen thought she controlled. It didn't seem possible, and yet the proof sat in Clara's hand. The tide was turning, but so was the danger, because if Karen learned the truth before I was ready, she wouldn't just try to take my land. She'd come for me, and I had no doubt she'd stop at nothing. The night before it all came to a head, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat on that porch swing, the wood creaking beneath me, listening to the coyotes yipping in the distance. The papers Clara had found sat heavy in my lap, their words etched into my mind like scripture. Karen had built her empire on lies. But tomorrow, those lies were going to burn. Clara had arranged it all, an emergency town meeting, called under the guise of urgent HOA business. Karen couldn't resist something like that. It was her stage, her spotlight. What she didn't know was that state officials be there too, invited quietly by Clara's contacts. When morning came, I buttoned up my cleanest shirt, the same one I wore to my father's funeral. It felt right, carrying a piece of him with me. The town hall was packed, every seat filled, folks standing in the back, whispers buzzing like hornets. At the front of the room, Karen stood in her finest suit, hair pulled tight, clipboard gleaming under the lights. She looked like a queen ready to deliver judgment. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth as butter, "we are here today to address the ongoing violations and dangerous behavior of one resident, Mr. Earl Callahan." The room stirred. I felt eyes burning into me from every direction. Karen smiled, wide and polished. "For too long, he has defied our rules. He has endangered our property values, our safety, our community. Today, we vote to remove him permanently from Pine Hollow." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. My jaw clenched, but I stayed silent. "Not yet." Karen turned to me, lips curled. "Do you have anything to say for yourself before we proceed?" I rose slowly, unfolding the papers in my hand. My voice was steady, calm, but every word carried the weight of generations. "Yeah, Karen, I've got something to say. You've been waving around rules and fines, threatening me with seizure, turning this town against me. But the truth is, you never had the power you claimed." I held up the old deed, the federal exemption stamp shining under the light. Gasps rose from the crowd. "This ranch has been protected land since before Pine Hollow estates even existed. Your HOA never had authority. Every letter you sent me, every fine, every threat, it was fraud." Karen's face faltered just for a second, but she forced a laugh. "That's nonsense. He's making this up." Clara stepped forward, her voice clear as a bell. "It's not nonsense. I've reviewed the documents, and more than that." She lifted another folder, newer, with crisp federal seal. "Mr. Callahan isn't just exempt. He is, by law, listed as a federal overseer of HOA compliance across the state, which means every action you've taken against him wasn't just harassment, it was a crime." The room erupted. Voices rose, people standing, shock flashing across faces. Karen's smile collapsed. "That's impossible. He's just a rancher." I stepped closer, my boots echoing on the wooden floor. "Just a rancher, maybe, but a rancher who knows the value of truth, something you've never had." Two men in suits, the state officials Clara had called, rose from their seats. One spoke loud enough for all to hear. "Karen Whitfield, you are under investigation for fraud, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to unlawfully seize protected property. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all HOA activity. The color drained from her face. She sputtered, pointed at me. "You don't understand, he's lying. This whole town will fall apart without me." But nobody listened. Deputies stepped forward, not the ones she had bent before, but men standing tall now that the truth had come out. They escorted her out of the hall, her protests echoing down the corridor until they faded into silence. For a long moment the room was still. Then, slowly, heads turned toward me, not with suspicion anymore, not with anger, but with something else. Respect, maybe even shame for having doubted me. Old Joe Henderson, the feed store owner, stepped forward, hat in hand. "Earl, I'm sorry. We should have stood by you." I nodded, the lump in my throat too thick for words. The meeting broke apart after that, folks filing out in hushed tones, still buzzing from what they'd witnessed. I walked out into the sunlight, the air crisp and clean. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Back at the ranch, I stood by the fence line, watching the cattle graze in peace. The barn stood steady, the land stretching wide and free, just as it had for my father and his father before him. Karen was gone. Justice had been served. But as the wind carried the smell of hay and earth across the pasture, I knew one thing for certain. There would always be more Karens in the world. More people who thought rules were meant to crush instead of protect. The difference now was simple. I wasn't just a rancher anymore. I was the man who oversaw them all. And anyone who tried to take what wasn't theirs would learn that some battles aren't fought with fists or fines, but with truth, patience, and the quiet strength of a man who refuses to be broken. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and crimson. I tipped my hat, whispered a promise to my father's memory, and walked back toward the house. Justice had come to Pine Hollow, but the fight for what's right, that never ends.